In today's macro photography tutorial, we're playing around with some crazy contraptions to try and capture water drops colliding in mid-air. It's going to be a really messy and hopefully quite rewarding shoot, so stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome to another macro photography tutorial. Today we're taking another look at a shoot that I did a little while ago with different equipment and a little bit more hair. It's going to be water drop photography or water splash photography, splash art photography. There's a few different names for it, but essentially we're freezing the motion of water drops as they either hit a surface or as they collide in mid-air. It's a really interesting type of photography, but it's potentially very frustrating and very messy as well. I've got a few new pieces of equipment to try out as well, so let's take a look at those first. If you don't regularly check the blog on the Adaptalux website and you're not signed up to our email newsletter, you probably didn't see our update last week where Sam talked about all of the changes to the Adaptalux Flash Lighting Arms. This is one of those new prototypes that he talked about, and I'm really excited to get to grips with all of the changes. If you're familiar with the Adaptalux system, you've probably already seen the control pod and the LED lighting arms that plug into it. This works much the same way. You plug it into the control pod, you can change all of the brightnesses, but it's a xenon flash. It gives off a really fast, bright burst of light, which is going to be perfect for freezing the motion of our water drops. They're different prototypes to the ones that I used last time, so even I'm really excited to see what they can do. The other piece of equipment that is integral to this type of photography is a water drop kit. This is the MIOPS Splash. It's not the only one out there. It's very similar to the Pluto trigger that we were using last time. I'm not going to be comparing the two. I'm just using this because it's a little bit of variety. I want to get to grips with a different option out there. It's got the same reservoir at the top to hold lots of water or milk or whatever it is you might be wanting to drop. And of course it's got this little spout where you drop your drops from. It connects via Bluetooth to your phone, so you can change all of your timings and get very precise water drops and collisions down to the millisecond. This can be a little bit fiddly. I speak from experience because last time I spent more time trying to dial in that collision than I did actually setting everything up and playing around with my camera settings. It's all about the timing of the dropper. So we'll get to that in just a little while. But for now, I need somewhere to put this. We need to position our water drop kit over the top of some water. This might seem like quite an innocent task at first glance, but depending on how much space you've got available, it can be quite tricky. This is quite a small table here in my kitchen. You might remember from last time we were using this retort stand, which did a pretty good job of holding my bits and pieces in place. I've actually got it all wrapped up with sticky tape here to try and hold it in a stationary position and not rotate. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get that, so I had to find a different solution. The MIOPS dropper does actually come with a little miniature articulating arm here with a phone style clamp on the top, and you can place this onto the top of a tripod and maybe get enough height using it that way. I couldn't quite get that to work for me. I wanted everything to be over the top of my table, so getting a tripod close enough was a little bit tricky. I did find a decent solution in the end though. This is an articulating arm to hold phones, maybe for your desk or your bedside table. You can actually clamp this to your desk and then place the water drop kit in the phone clamp that holds it quite nicely. It's really nice for moving everything around and getting everything exactly where you need it to be. You can change the height really easily. So I think that's a really nice solution. Setting up the MIOPS Splash is pretty easy. There's just a few ports on the side that you can plug wires into, one of which is for power, and I'm going to be powering it using this little phone power bank. It just plugs in via USB and you get a little indicator light to tell you that it's turned on. You then just need to navigate your wires out of the way so that they're not dangling down into your shot, and you have power. The other thing that you need to plug in is either your camera or your flash. I've got this little wire here which is specific to the type of camera that you need, so this one is for my Sony. I'm going to be plugging this in and stretching it down to my camera. This is what's going to trigger the camera to take the picture, and because we've got our flash triggering from the hot shoe of the camera, it's all going to go off in sequence. The problem with my retort stand was this little tension on the wire pulls this whole setup down, so if I've got my camera down over here, it wanted to rotate that retort stand. This setup works pretty well for keeping everything sturdy. So I've got my water drop kit set up and it's plugged into my camera, which is a Sony a7 III with a 100mm f2.8 Tachina macro lens on the front. You don't necessarily need a macro lens for this type of work, but it certainly helps to get a lot closer to the surface of your water and to those water splashes without too much cropping needed. The surface of our water is going to be the next thing that we need to think about. We need to think about the type of shot that we want to go for and the type of lighting, the type of background. The last shoot that I was doing, I wasn't too concerned about the background. I just wanted black background shots, and I was more focused on trying to get a low angle of some milk jumping up out of the water. Today I want to introduce a little bit more colour into these shots, and that's going to need a completely different style. I tried using our background gradient cards to add a little bit of colour using the same methods that we used last time, but I found that the background cards needed to be so close to the splashes. They were getting splashed on all of the time, and you could see all of those splashes and marks being created on the background. There was also an unpleasant line that sort of cut off the splashes where the edge of our container met the backdrop. It worked out all right, and got some nice shots of milk jumping up really high, but I didn't quite like those final shots. That led me to trying a few different methods and deciding to move to a black container. Last time we were using two white bowls inside each other, because it didn't really matter whether the light was hitting the bottom of the bowl. We were using a lot of milk, which is quite opaque. Today I want to use water, which is really translucent. You can see everything under the surface of the water. And my idea for getting colour onto my shots is actually to use the reflections on the top of the water. If you place a coloured object behind your surface, you can actually see the reflection of that colour from certain angles. I'm going to be making use of that with the placement of my camera, the placement of my lighting, and my choice of backdrop. The size of your container is just as important as its colour. I did go for all black containers, but I started quite small with this little lunchbox and a bowl. Unfortunately, both of those, you could always see the edges of them. It gave you that telltale black line where the end of your container meets the start of your backdrop. I wanted to try and get some sort of infinite colour, just a nice smooth gradient on our image from foreground to background. To do that, you need a really wide or large container. The largest one that I've got is actually this baking tray. It's come straight out of my oven, and it's got a nice black surface, so I can actually shoot across quite a large surface of it without seeing either the front lip or the back lip of the container. We're not aiming to get any of our backdrop actually in the frame. All I'm doing here is getting the reflection of the backdrop as it bounces off the surface of the water. Now, because the surface of my water is quite large, my background gradient cards don't quite cut it. They're not quite large enough to cover this whole surface area, so I needed another solution. I've got this product shooting tent. It's just a stand-in for a little white backdrop. If you've got some white paper, some large sheets of paper or card or something like that, all you need is a big white surface behind your little water reservoir down here. What we're going to be doing is shining light directly against this backdrop, which is then going to reflect off our water up into our camera and hopefully create some interesting shadows and potentially silhouettes of our splashes as they jump out of the water. To add a little bit more colour, I've also got some food colouring. I'm not entirely sure what this is going to do for our shots, but I think it's worth a go. So this whole time I've been saying water drops, but what we're actually dropping today is a bit of a mixture. Last time we were dropping milk, and I found that the viscosity of the milk was actually a little bit thicker, and it created these more interesting collisions. As the surface tension of the water holds everything together, you get different types of explosions as the water drops collide. I want to try and thicken up my water so I get more interesting collisions this time. I'm going to be doing that using some glycerin. This is a thickening agent that you can find in the baking department of your supermarket. All I'm doing is mixing in a little bit of this glycerin with my water that's going into the reservoir of my dropper. I've got 1 part glycerin to about 8 parts water. You can change this mixture, that's just guesswork from me, but it seemed to work pretty well so far. You can try adding a little bit more or a little bit less depending on how your drops are behaving. If you make your drops too thick, they might struggle to land nicely on your water and jump back up again. But the thicker, or generally the thicker your solution is, the wider and the more interesting your explosions are going to be when the water drops collide. I am aware that there's been a lot of talking, a lot of explanation and not much shooting so far, so I'm going to be setting up some lighting so that we can start taking some shots. The first thing that we need to do is add the IR blaster to the top of the camera, which is going to be able to trigger our lighting arms. Our lighting arms are going to plug into the control pod, which I've got sat on a little mini tripod here so that I can get a wide range of movement and placement of my arms. My arms are just going to plug into the control pod, and I'm going to try and get them as close to my backdrop as I can. The placement of your arms isn't too important, other than you need to obviously keep them out of your frame, and you also need to make sure that they're out of the way of the trajectory of our water drops. What that means is my lighting arms are going to be placed sort of around here and bent around so that they're not in the way of the drops, but they're also not shining on the interior of my baking tray. I don't want any light coming up from the underneath of the surface of my water, which is going to diminish the reflection from my backdrop. Speaking of the reflection coming from the background, I want to add a little bit of colour. The way that I'm going to do that is by using the gels that come with the Adaptalux Studio Flash Lighting Arms. We've got lots of different choices, and these gels, which Sam has redesigned, are really nice. They've got a nice little tactile feel to them, and they're nice and soft, so they easily slip over the front of my lighting arms. I'm going to pop maybe a purple one on this side and a green one on the other side. What this is going to do is flood this backdrop with coloured light. Because it's white, the reflections are going to be the colours mixing on that white surface. That's going to reflect down onto my surface where the drops are, and then up into my camera, so hopefully I'll get a good full frame of colour with a water drop in the middle. The very last thing that I need to do is figure out my camera settings and my focus. Your first instinct might be that you need a really fast shutter speed to freeze the motion of these water drops, but that's not actually the case. The freezing of the motion is done by the duration of the flash. The flash of light is what's going to expose our camera for only a fraction of a second, even if our shutter speed is quite slow. So I'm going to be shooting at 1/100th or 1/160th, and that's going to keep us under the flash sync speed of our lighting arms, but also be fast enough that we don't get any motion blur from any ambient light that's still in the room. I'm going to be shooting at f8 or f11 just so that I can get a nice deep depth of field on my water splashes, and ISO 4000 to 5000 depending on how much light I actually need. The trouble with this type of setup is that we're reflecting light, which means not a lot of it is making it back to the camera, hence that higher ISO than I would normally like. I would be tempted to turn the power of the flash up, but we need the speed. I'm going to be setting these to speed 5, the 5th light on our lighting arm, and that's going to be able to freeze those water drops for the maximum amount of sharpness in our image. So I think I'm pretty much ready to go here. I've increased the speed of my lighting arms just by using the manual buttons on top of the pod, and we now have a little test button on the bottom of the IR trigger, so I can test that those are working, and you can see that lovely green light there just for a split second. The last thing that we need to do is focus, and what I'm going to do there is a little bit tricky to show you manually like this, but I'm basically going to trigger a drop and place this knife right where the water drop lands, and then I can focus on the edge of the knife, telling me exactly where my water drops are going to land. This is pretty important because you might not notice if your water drops are landing in a slightly different position than you thought, and they'll all be out of focus, which is very frustrating when you get a really nice collision. This is the MIOPS Mobile App. Once you've installed this and opened it up, it's going to search for your MIOPS devices, in this case, the MIOPS Splash. You can hit OK, and it's going to bring up this nice, simple little interface where you can change the durations and delays between all of your drops. At the moment here, we've got just one drop at 100 milliseconds duration for the drop, so quite a large drop, and 100 milliseconds between that drop and the camera triggering. If I hit OK here and trigger my camera, you can see that the drop went off, but my camera actually went off before the drop hit. If I hit this and change the delay to, say, 400 milliseconds, you see that the camera went off after the drop hit. And this is the key to finding those sweet spots where your drops are hitting the surface of your water, jumping up and then colliding. There's a lot of trial and error here. I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what settings you're going to need here, because it depends on the type of liquids that you're dropping, it depends on the height that you're dropping them from, the surface and the container that you're dropping them into. All of those are going to affect how high your water drops jump up and when the next splash is going to hit them, and then subsequently when your camera is going to need to trigger as well. I recommend playing around with this before you start getting into your shots. This is going to take a lot of time to figure out exactly what your particular setup requires in order to get a collision. Once you are ready to shoot, you can just hit trigger over and over again and get shot after shot after shot, hopefully all with collisions. You can then start really experimenting with different colors on your lighting arms and different angles for your camera. If you're just starting out with photography or macro photography, this is not the simplest setup to get to grips with. There's a lot going on here, and it was no less complicated last time. I do think that it's a little bit more complicated this time with bouncing that light off the backdrop onto the surface of the water and then into the camera, but the results, I think, speak for themselves. The colours that we're getting reflecting on the surface of our water are really pleasing. The one thing that I did want to try was adding a little bit of food colouring to the water that I'm dropping from my reservoir. I'm going to be adding a little bit of pink and blue and green just to see what that does when the light is still reflecting from the background. I'm not sure whether we're going to be able to see it, or maybe it'll just add an extra little bit of a highlight to our shots, but I think it's worth a try. I've been doing this for a couple of days now. There's a lot to think about, there's a lot to try out. I've been trying different backdrops, different lighting setups, finding out how to get colour into these shots, what kind of mixture to use, the settings on the dropper. There's a lot to think about, and it can be really frustrating at times. However, the payoff is certainly worth it when you can get those water drops colliding in midair. It's not something that you can see with your naked eye. They pass you by very, very quickly. Even when you've got a flash going off, you might only get a split-second idea of what that flash captured. But when you look on the back of your camera, it's certainly worth it. I've really enjoyed getting these shots, despite the frustration, despite the gallons of milk that I actually spilt all over my floor. I've had a lot of fun, and using the new Flash prototypes is a real joy. Sam's made a lot of improvements, so if you've not seen that update video that he put out last week, I definitely recommend going and watching that if you're interested in the progress of our Flash project. For now, I'm going to leave you to the comment section to let me know how you do this type of photography. If you've tried water drop photography before, what kind of angles do you prefer? What kind of solutions do you like to use? I'd be really interested to know, because I don't think this will be the last time that I try this type of photography. If you find yourself down in the comment section, make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future macro photography tutorials, ideas, and inspiration. For now though guys, that's all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.